minute. I do see the numbers ticking up. People are coming in. So, sit back, settle in, grab a hot drink or a cold drink, whatever your fancy is. We've got a great session ahead of us today. Angelo, Kameron, I hope you're doing well and ready to get started. We're going to do that in a couple seconds here. That sounds good.
Ready to go. Excited.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's good. Lots of good energy in the room. Hello from Columbus for folks joining us today. If you want to open up the chat, drop where you're saying hello from, where you're seated today. That would be great. Again, Angelo, Kameron, me, we're all in Columbus. And we've got a great session for you. So an official welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you for attending our webinar on effective project governance and getting your organization to adopt it. My name is Melissa Prusher. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Avaap, and it's a true delight to welcome you here today. Again, great group of people coming in here. Looks like we've got some returning names on our attendee list as well. Looks like folks all over the country and Canada. Super exciting that we could be from all over and together in one room. I think project governance is taking a more critical role today, super key to project success, especially with so many people working in a hybrid situation. Project governance is just more important than ever. So really glad to impart some good strategies and insight today on behalf of Angelo and Kameron. Great pleasure to introduce our speakers, Avaap Advisory Vice Presidents, Kameron deVente and Angelo Mazzocco. Both of them bring a wealth of experience in helping organizations achieve transformation and make smart software decisions. I'll let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit more about their backgrounds, why they're experts to share this information with you today. But before I do want to cover a couple housekeeping items. First, you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar. Don't feel the need to wait to the end. Drop your questions in and we will get to them at the end, or if it makes sense to answer them during the session, we sure will do so. Otherwise, as you think of things you want to ask to Kameron and Angelo, this is your time to do so. Go ahead, drop it in the Q&A. Of course, you see our chat is lively. Keep it lively. If there's information that we can add, supplemental links to things, we'll go ahead and do so. If not, if you have your own commentary to add, by all means, put it there. The one question everyone always asks is, will we get a copy of today's session? The answer is yes. You will get an on-demand version of today's webinar in your inbox. It'll also be available on our website within 2 business days. If at the end of the session you realize you want to connect and talk about project governance in your own organization, you can go ahead and send me a private message or drop it in the chat, and we'll make sure to get you connected, after the event. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Angelo and Kameron. Looking forward to a great session on project governance and getting your organization to adopt it. Gentlemen, to you.
Thanks a lot, Melissa. Appreciate that. It's great to see so many people on the call and from across the country and into Canada as well. I'm Kameron deVente, Vice President with Avaap Advisory Services, and I've been with Avaap about 16 years. But I guess if I start to reflect back on a career, I've been 35 years doing very similar management consulting and enterprise system implementation experience, really in the full life cycle of all the pieces and parts to be successful in a transformational, system implementation journey, all the way from, selecting the right solution, designing, thinking about the building blocks of it, the testing of it, all the way up to realizing some of the benefits. So I guess the word "been around the block" is probably the right way to say it for 35 years in different various aspects across industries. So kind of bringing that to the table. I've got executive account ownership for some accounts that we kind of bring the best of Avaap to those accounts, and making sure we kind of tie those our capabilities to the needs of the clients. I've got as with Avaap, I was a chief operating officer for years, so I've got kind of that view of governance from an organizational perspective as well as the consulting piece. I've had experience on multiple selections and implementations. More recently in my career, I've had a lot of roles in the kind of executive QA world, which of course I'm in a position to see, is the governance really working for a corporation or for a project? And it's kind of a broader view to see, how it actually works and if it's effective, and what are some of the ramifications if it doesn't work. And then I've got some certifications in project management and organizational change management too. So really excited to be here and talk about this, important topic. Angelo?
Thank you, Cameron. By the way, I've known Cameron, it seems, almost all the years that he's been a pro, and I really enjoy sharing the stage with him. I've been in the business about 34 years or so, 15 plus of those as a CIO, not as many years as Cameron as a consultant, but have had some great opportunities to work with a number of consulting groups. I've also, for about that same period of time, worked as an adjunct professor, MBA programs at Ohio State, and more recently, Otterbein University. I have had the opportunity to co-found a number of forums and organizations that you may hear about: CIO Forum, CIO Tomorrow, ComSpark, Power Awards, and also the CEO Forum. And all of them bring a different aspect to the field we work in, which is technology, but gives us so many different ways to take a look at what organizations are doing and what they're prioritizing, and making sure that they've got proper governance for. So I do have quite a bit of experience with organizational and project governance. Let me give you a feel for what we're going to talk about today. So we'll go through the agenda. First of all, we're gonna get into elements of project success. Excuse me. We're going to define project governance. We're going to talk about decision making. We're going to differentiate between project governance and corporate governance, and we're going to talk about the importance and benefits of governance. And we're going to allow some time too for an open discussion, Q&A, and we want to hear your questions, even if it goes beyond the time allotted here, so that we can get back to you to make sure that you're satisfied from what we're doing today. One of the things that I mentioned that I've been able to do is to develop organizations like the CIO Tomorrow event. And these are events where I've been able to learn quite a bit. And the reason for that is—
Let's go back one slide, please.
Oop, I'm sorry.
Just go back one slide. Sorry, Angelo, keep going. I think you're
okay.
I think you're
Yeah, things like CIO Tomorrow, you get a chance to hear people from other organizations talk about what's important to them. So for instance, last year and coming up this year in August, last year in August, and Kameron and I both had a chance to experience it. We're a major sponsor for the event each year. And what got talked about, for instance, one of the key players and talked about cybersecurity and how to protect customer data. So think about the governance structure. When you go to a program like that, they talk about the topic itself, but don't always get into how do you govern cybersecurity? How do you govern your customer data, which is so important? And those are the things we're going to talk about today. Or how do you transition your organization from where you are today to third wave agility and things of that sort? It isn't like you just do it. Some folks think you do. You have to plan it. You have to make sure the governance is going to be proper. And does the corporate governance support something like this that may be considered a project governance? Some other items that were covered in CIO Tomorrow last year had to do with the ERP journey, and that's something our organization is very familiar with. Also, digital ethics. This year, and we're putting in a prompt. Hope you get a chance to come or attend, and that is there are going to be discussions on the culture of curiosity. So the CIO, new CIO of Ohio State University, going to talk about that. Think about that with the social media and things of that sort today, how people are just able to get into information that, 10 years ago you would have never thought of. Or think about, I remember the world without the iPhone. And today it's hard to imagine that. But, if we've had to spend a lot of time on what should be the governance inside the organization, especially. And there's going to be also a discussion about Intel, who is going to be coming to the Ohio area and developing a $100 billion process there to build chips and make sure that there's enough chips. Of course, we all know with the past couple of years and COVID and the shortages that we've had in many products, but the chips have certainly been one of them. And so we're going to try to help that in the Ohio area anyway. I'm gonna stop there just to give you an idea of some of the topics that have come up that it's so important to have proper governance.
Yeah, Angelo, I've been attending those for years, and they're so well run, and it just always strikes me that think about the level of corporate decision, strategy decision has to be made for all those topics you just discussed. Major, ERP system changes, external industry dynamics, affect those things. So, who's making those actual decisions, and then how do you drive those to the project level, and then carry that down into the project project governance decision making. It's a great way to kind of put an umbrella over the top of why we're here today talking about project governance and how that fits into corporate governance. And you see that play out, topic after topic that you just mentioned, over the years on those CIO Tomorrow discussions. And in anybody else's, region area, there's probably similar type of, CIO, executive level discussions that are happening. And so, you can't escape corporate and project governance in those topics.
Very
so
true.
That's the next slide. We'll want to just share, when we think, we're with Avaap, and we think about the transformational journey that companies go through from start to finish. And when we say start to finish, what does that really mean? When you're considering a major transformational change, maybe an ERP, a major system change or whatnot, and the end is typically, we think of the end as when you're achieving the benefits and optimizing, not so much the milestone of a go live or the kickoff as the start. It's thinking about that full life cycle. So it really takes some experience across that full life cycle to kind of understand where companies are and how we can fit in, how to fit in and be relevant with some topics. So over the past year, we've had a few topics on similar webinars, how to effectively select a cloud solution. That was one webinar back in, what was that, last April or May. And then we talk about developing a phase 0 strategy. That was a webinar, and that gets into, before you actually start the implementation, what are some things, long lead time items, policies, inventory of processes to consider? What are some things that get right up front? So we went into that in a little deeper level. And again, these webinars are still available on our website and good stuff. And Angelo and I, presented on those. We had a discussion on getting your ERP implementation right, your cloud implementation right, with some success factors there. But one thing we heard out of those meetings, we asked for additional topics, and it felt like we touched on governance in each of those webinars. And we asked the group what would be a next relevant topic, and one was effective project governance. So that's what brought us here today, and we're really excited to have this discussion. And like any of these webinars we've done, you're going to hear some things you already knew, and you're going to hear some things maybe that are new for people. It'll definitely be level set. And I always view these as, if I hear information that I already knew, it reinforces what I knew. And if I hear some new things, then I've walked away a little bit more enlightened and add a little credibility to your personal point of view on project governance and your understanding of project governance. It's good for every way around on these type of sessions. So before we dive into the next slide, I do want to just use the chat for a second and just hear what people have to say. When we say project governance or governance, what one word or two words come to mind Just, throw those out there quickly on chat. We can start to just gauge the audience and see when someone says, because governance is such a broad topic, when someone says, project governance, what comes to mind? I've got the chat up and I'm looking for who's the first one to throw something out there. Let's see.
There we go.
Decision-making, excellent. Leadership, yep. Stakeholders, prioritization, great. Structure, excellent. Communication.
Plan for change. That's a
Plan
good
for
one.
change. Accountability. Risk evaluation, yep, excellent. Regulations. Okay, that's really good. I think we're going to touch on a lot of these, and certainly you can see the spirit of, there's an element of, the people side, the change management side, there's an element of decision making, there's an element of communication, roles of people, accountability. I think we're going to touch on those as we go through the next few slides here, but this is really great. Thanks for throwing out some of those ideas and get the juices flowing on the project governance. So Angelo, I'll hand it over to you to get to the next slide.
Thank you. Well, here's one definition that I found. It's governance sets the boundaries within which people operate. I love that. It identifies who is responsible for making which decision. I saw decision come up on the sheet a couple of times.
Yep.
And it defines the process they use to make legitimate decisions. So it's a lot about boundaries and a lot about who should decide what. And if you think about it, there's so much we do within organizations that if you didn't have that basic set of definitions, it would be chaos. And that's really what we're trying to do here, is make sure that we have the rules set up so that there isn't chaos, that there's people playing well together, there's good teamwork, etc. So the structure and processes need to be right. So project governance details the entire organization structure along with the immediate project team. A good project governance framework should define how we manage the entire project lifecycle. That's key. And I'm sure, every organization who's represented in our audience would say that they have a project lifecycle. I would also bet that many of them differ, but the idea is that your organization is using the one that you use. And it would be, once again, very difficult to get things done otherwise within your project. By taking standard processes and integrating them into a system, you're enforcing best practices, you're fostering transparency, and you're building accountability across project teams. Decision-making process is fundamental to the structure. Well-defined project milestone approvals and sign-offs are key. Setting up a risk management process is also very important. And I know I'm flying through these, but certainly we need to make sure that these are elements within the structure and process that we have. Having a change control process, right? You can't, we all talk about it, especially those of us who've worked with different clients, whether it was inside our own company or working for a client where they seem to want to change the scope, that scope creep, right? We need to have a process that's positive and one that they understand as well, so that when they wish to have a change in scope, there's a way to do that, but there's a proper way, and it's done analytically. It's done so that everyone in the other part of the projects understand what's going on. So foster a culture of continuous learning that allows project teams to continuously improve and to discuss lessons learned in a blame-free environment. That's so key. You know, I have been in those meetings where at the end of the project, let's talk about what went well and what didn't. And a couple people may start pointing fingers. That's not what it's intended to do. It's really intended to learn so that our next project will be more successful. Our next project will have even greater success. So also the people aspects, right? Project governance describes the objectives that project managers must achieve. These objectives are clear, achievable, sustainable. It needs to be. Everyone needs to get it. It is best if senior managers take the time to understand project managers' activities to establish appropriate goals. Governance empowers project professionals to execute their responsibilities by defining delegated limits of authority and establishing effective escalation routes for issues and change requests. Good governance also calls for the roles and responsibilities of the team and wider stakeholders to be clearly defined. Creating roles and responsibility in some documented form is important. It's very important to make sure that everyone knows not only who does what, but who can do what. Making sure that there's a project sponsor, that there's a project oversight team. And then there's information and data. Project governance provides a method to share information. Sharing consistent data and information can be crucial to the project's success. You can't have all of that data within the hands of just one project team member. Can't do it. You want to standardize your project data to get consistent metrics, and you can use the metrics to measure performance reliably across the portfolio and the organization. Integrating your project data creates a single source of truth that everyone can rely on. By standardizing and integrating your data into one system, you create trusted real-time insight on a project portfolio and company level that can be used to make better decisions. I was going to give you a quick couple of examples. There was one project I worked on years ago. It was at Bank One, before Bank One became JP Morgan Chase. And it was being run by, we were rewriting all of the retail and all of the credit card systems that were in Bank One. And we had 300 people working on the project. Can you imagine if there was no governance? There was so much volume of work being done by so many people that it could very easily have been just crazy. And luckily for us, we were able to finish the project. But so important was everyone understanding, you know, what it was that we needed to do and how we were going to do it and who was going to make what calls. To add insult to injury, we were actually working 24 hours a day. So we would have handoffs between the project teams early in the morning and late at night in order to make sure that we were getting the volume of work done, but also getting it done constructively and as fast as we could. The other example, my first job as a CIO was at the dispatch company, and at the time, they were about 20 different companies. And the ownership decided that they wanted to consolidate, create the concept of shared service. And so we went from being very silo operated, that we decided that we would consolidate into a single organization. So that meant you had pieces of the organization that operated separately, now operating together. And you couldn't do that in one day, 1 month. It took about 6 months for us to do that process. Governance was the key to success. So.
Yeah, Angelo, thanks. I'll share one example from a client. You know, when you look at that, define project milestones on the bottom left there. I mean, those are words on a page, and I think It's probably a captain obvious point for a lot of people on the phone. Of course, you got project milestones and those keys for success, but bring it to life with an example. A client I had a few years ago, we said we want to be a milestone driven project. Okay, what does that really mean? Well, at the beginning of the project, we didn't have all the milestones defined, but we had a few, several defined that were throughout the life of the project, like go live and, that couldn't move for external reasons, and kickoff and a couple other things, end of a certain phase. So we knew what those were. So we started with, let's say, 6 milestones. But over time, those milestones grew. We ended up with about 75 milestones because we got more detailed and elaborate in our work planning. We put those milestones on the chart for reporting, and we also include some major decisions as milestones. And what that did is it gave everybody on the team understanding of the urgency to hit those milestones. We reported red, yellow, green against those. That it also prevented somebody from saying, hey, this project's 2.5 years long. And so if we're a little behind here, we can make that up. It's okay. We got plenty of time to worry about this. But when you put it into a milestone chart that's effective, you can see that you missed this milestone. There's 5 other milestones dependent on that one. And now the whole thing's pushing out. I mean, it sounds like, some basic project program management stuff, but it really gets into the governance of how do you, get into using those milestones to drive the team to success. And it worked very well because it did the trick with creating that urgency, every week and every month on the project. So Vanessa, next slide. Let's do a little deeper dive. We heard, decision making, roles. This has been an iconic maybe graphic that I've had in my head for a few years on how to just think about project governance and decision making. And when you think about any kind of project, there's hundreds and hundreds of decisions, big and small, micro and macro. They're happening all the time. So how do you really effectively channel all the energy and the roles to be effective? And what this thing is showing is that, typically on most projects, you probably have, variations of these, but generally speaking, you've got, the many team members, you've got people who are empowered work stream leads, you've got a project management layer, you've got a steering committee, and you've got some executive sponsors. It's probably a fairly general way to think about about projects. What you want to do is you want to kind of create a culture on the left side of identifying issues, risks, some of those key decisions. I'll talk about KBDs in a second. That stands for key business decision. Those things, you want to identify those early and often, so that you know when to escalate those and get those on the table so they can be worked on by the appropriate people. So those have to be kind of bottom up. So good governance will say, builds a culture of driving those out as early as possible. It doesn't help anything to sit on an issue, sit on a risk and hold on to it. You want to get that in the hands of the people that can start talking about it. Then once you get those issues, risks, up to the appropriate level, how do you actually drive those down into the rest of the team with resolutions, decisions, mitigations? And so kind of that, up and down the chain effectively is really a good model of project governance. And the percentages on the left side is kind of Kameron's view from experience of, if you're doing this right, you can effectively make those decisions, a lot of those decisions, at the work stream level, because they don't impact outside the functional area or whatnot. But in some cases, those have to be bubbled up to be across functions, across the team, and those get up to the project level. And then a smaller percent, makes it up to rely on the steering committee and the executive sponsors to make those decisions. I mean, that's fundamentally how this is, this working here. And you can see the definitions of some of those layers on the right-hand side. I'll give a couple examples of bringing this to life and how we've used this. So key business decisions. We just discovered on this project a few years ago that we had decisions to make, and someone would come into the steering meeting or come into the work stream meeting or whatever and describe the decision. but it wasn't written down. It wasn't very organized in terms of the thoughts. And we said, let's get this on paper. Let's create a standard document called the KBD. It has the different options, the pros and cons, the rationale for the recommendation and decisions. And that became the tool that we would use to think through these decisions. And also, most of the time, there's iterations on these. So you'd bring it to the right level and you'd say, I think here's the recommendation. Hey, you missed an assumption. You didn't talk to this group. You didn't get input from this group. Go back and reiterate on this. And by the time these decisions got fully documented and baked out, they were really well seasoned, if you will, and they were debated and they were solved. So that was a huge success to have those KBDs written down, and those were milestones to make happen. The other dynamic on this thing is an example from a different client was when we showed this chart to them, the executive team said, we have the vision. And so bring us those decisions, bring us those recommendations, and we'll make the final decision because we understand the corporate vision and strategy. And we kind of said, wait a minute, that can work, but that makes a lot of decision making at the top of this pyramid. We want to push it to as much as you can down below. And they said, well, how do you do that? And we said, let's make sure we spend some time packaging that vision into what we call the vision packet. And that was a must read for everybody on the project team. And so when we got confident that everybody was well entrenched in the strategy and the vision of what we're going, they were able to make those decisions much more effectively on their own in their empowered role. So it was a subtle dynamic, but it made a huge difference in how we thought. And it just took that one, that vision packet to go out to everybody and have a dialogue on that, which really helped us be much more efficient in addressing those hundreds and hundreds of issues and risks and decisions that had to be made. So again, governance, there's a lot of, pretty straightforward words on a page, but really those things kind of get brought to life when you hear some of those stories. So that's hopefully this icon is helpful. And certainly those definition of those different 5 layers of empowered groups. There's a more detail to add to those, but those are you can certainly see the concept there. Let's go next slide, Vanessa. We want to. It was the build slide. Okay, good. Project governance is different from the organizational governance or daily governance. I guess corporate or organizational governance, we're kind of put in the same bucket. This organizational governance is a system of rules that helps the organization achieve its objectives, practices and processes to run the usual business, but it doesn't give more detailed framework that allows for delivering a project. So corporate governance provides major guardrails and insights to how project governance should be defined to help with the culture of the to be within the culture, to keep with the culture of the organization. So just to give a little bit of, when you think about corporate governance, practices, policies, processes, how well are they documented? What's the culture of reviewing those across the organization? How often are those updated? Exactly how are they updated? There's contract, vendor management policies, et cetera. I saw on the chat earlier on the risk management side, regulations, business continuity, disaster planning, security, external compliance and regulations. Those all fall underneath that corporate risk management as well. Financial management is, financial measures, the financials of the company, shared across it, culture of, what's the culture of developing business cases to make decisions? What's the level of detail in those business cases that the company is requiring? Roles and structure, is there a corporate-wide project management office, or is it, kind of as needed for these projects? Does the organization have a steering committee mindset? Is that a thing? Are there third-party investors to consider in some of the decision-making and governance? is there a board of trustees that has to be included in that as well? So back to the pyramid, is there other people that have to be, connected to that chain? So those are all the things that fall underneath corporate governance. And I'm sure I left a few things out, but we're trying to paint a picture that, project governance, falls seamlessly into that current, corporate governance. I guess that's the point, because that corporate governance helps set some of the culture there. And so, it'll fit seamlessly. The project governance is linked to the corporate governance. Use what currently exists and tweak corporate processes to make them suitable to use in a project environment. The main aim of project governance is ensure that projects are carried out in the right way for your organization, which is intrinsically tied to the governance at the corporate level. Once project governance is created for one project, it can be reusable and finely tuned and honed on other projects as well. And it really becomes a fabric of your corporate culture. Is how do you, and then, drum roll, Vanessa, the project governance shows up as one of the items under the umbrella of corporate governance. So that becomes part of the fabric of your corporate governance. So they really go hand in hand. I've got just a couple quick stories to share. One's a simple one. I had a client a few years ago that had what they call were M10 meetings. And this is the executive team get together every Monday morning at 10 o'clock, every week consistently. And so when we did a pretty major system implementation project, we just plugged right into that M10 meeting as the that executive level. And we aligned all of our project meetings around that schedule. So we made sure we were prepared for that next level. So a lot of times we went to that M10 meeting for, raise awareness. We talked about any issues and risks, try to keep the percentage of those down that we brought to the table. But it shows that, it was probably a simple example, but, you've already got something in place in terms of how the executives and the decision makers come together. So just you plug into that. And then the fun story I like to share, I've shared this in the past webinars, is the Panama Canal analogy story. And if you're all familiar with David McCullough, he wrote a book called The Path Between the Seas. I highly recommend it. It's about the building of the Panama Canal. And there's a guy named John Stevens who was famous for the railroads in Canada and in the US. And he was asked to be the project manager on the Panama Canal, building Panama Canal back in the early 1900s. And there was a metric that he was given by the corporate governance, which is the U.S. government and the president, to start digging. And how much dirt are you moving to get to build the Panama Canal? And he said, "I'm not digging. I'm not digging until I'm ready." And they're like, "What do you mean you're not digging? That's what we're doing here." And he said, "I'm going to take the time it takes to put in the infrastructure and the governance so we can be successful." And so he put in place, the rail lines, he put in place the healthcare facilities, he put in place how the food gets in. All these things had to be put in place. He didn't dig one drop of dirt for about a year. And he got hammered by everybody. The only one protecting was the president, Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy said, "Okay, I think it sounds like you know what you're doing, so I'll let you keep going." And by gosh, after many decades of trying to do the Panama Canal, John Stevens was successful because he established that governance and infrastructure to be successful on that very big project. So I just thought it was a fascinating, dynamic and relevant to what we're talking about here. So I'll end there. And anything, Angelo, to add before we step to the next slide?
I do. Before I get into the benefits, I just wanted to reply to Pam Hartman, who is asking the question of how do you match up a traditional model with an agile project and not slow down the process. The reason I'm interested in answering this is that in 2011, I went from being a CIO, I became the president of a company called Pillar Technology that was one of the first, to jump onto agile development. And so it was a blast. And we worked with some bona fide organizations, John Deere, Abercrombie and Fitch, and I can go on and on and on. But that was so difficult to do, because if you think about it, the corporate governance was traditional. It was old time. It was, very much, even on the system side, waterfall, so that it was done in a certain way. Now, how do you come in with an entirely new strategy? And believe me, I picked on this because my answer doesn't only apply to traditional, to agile development. It can also be used for doing something as drastic as we did at Bank One or at the dispatch. But what you need to do, I believe, is isolate the new project. So the first agile project that we did at any company, and I remember doing this at Huntington Bank, where we actually isolated an area of the organization where we were going to implement agile. And that meant the rest of the organization was still running in traditional mode. So I think that is one thing that you learn about corporate governance and project governance. Many times you can use a project to change the way you're doing corporate governance. Now, today, many of those organizations who we did their initial projects, today, many of them are entirely agile from an operations standpoint, from a corporate standpoint. They have completely transitioned the way that they do work. But it was only having that initial governance structure, but then how do you work in change? And of course, there's got to be a lot of change management to go along with that, because people are affected. And I remember people saying, what, you're turning my world upside down here, right? Going to this agile approach. And those of us that had learned, through PMI and through our Big Four and Big Eight status had only really learned back in the days prior to 2010. I think the Agile Manifesto was early 2000s. And so it just changed the way we did things. And there are many others that did as well. So that was a great question, Pam. I hope that's some of the answer. If you want some more, we can definitely get on the phone and talk. So I'm going to go to importance and benefits of project governance. And that's the next page, Vanessa. If we can skip to there we go. So processes are probably first and foremost in terms of the benefits, ensuring that we are having everyone, once we get to a level of governance, that they're being done in the same way, similar way. So that informs stakeholders of the appropriate processes in a project. Are we going to fix the error right away, or are we going to batch them up and do something later, which would be in the IT side of things. ROI, increase the odds of achieving desired ROI. I remember a CEO coming to watch and see what was going on in a system that we were building. And, we were to the point where we're ready to implement. And, luckily I didn't say anything, but I was about ready to say, pop the champagne. And the CEO said, you know what, this means that we're now at the point where we can begin to generate revenue. And everything up to now has been nothing but costs. So many times as systems people, we think in terms of, getting to the next level, getting to the implementation, but our CEO counterpart is thinking differently. They're thinking in terms of the ROI. They're thinking in terms of how our customers and our employees are going to be impacted. And that's important to understand. Also, culture. Governance can motivate your team. No one wants chaos, especially those of us who work in systems. The last thing we want to do is seeing rules getting changed every day, and some people being dealt with differently in terms of how they process their errors or process their systems. So this allows us to make sure that we're being motivated properly. Also, accountability. And I do want to go back right in the middle of this. It's perfect timing, I think, is go back to what Melissa talked about. think about what the world has been for the last 3 years. I know that during that time, I was a CIO at a physician's healthcare group, one of the largest in the US. And we had to not only switch to have people work from home, but now we had to save our doctors and nurses and try to minimize their contact with patients because of COVID. And so we went back to an old technology that's been around forever, but we hadn't used very much, and that's telehealth. And that became pretty key. And, you know, we're going to look back, I think, to these years in history and think of how important it was and what we were able to do, although there were many lives that were, you know, that passed as a result. So we weren't by any means 100% perfect, but in the end, we figured out ways to do things so that we could minimize. Can you imagine if doctors and nurses would have had to come in more contact with people who had COVID, especially at the beginning? It seemed like more and more people were going to the hospital, more and more people were dying. At least these days, it's not as much the case. And for those who don't know, Avaap, we actually provide the COVID numbers. So we produce them every day for state of Ohio, and we actually help some others. But that's a pretty cool thing to be able to say that you do. And certainly a project that I'll never forget, where we had to just change the rules completely and do it as quickly but as constructively as we could. We would have never allowed the entire company to have their computers at home and doing major, you know, HIPAA regulated activity. But we found ourselves in a situation where we had to do it. Time and budget accomplishes your projects on time, within budget. That's important. The business needs to know when it can begin the next stage of what it wants to do by how we set the time and budget. Making the right choices, communication, making sure that the right people know what needs to happen and what relevant parties need to be informed. Resource allocation prioritizes the resources and contributes to minimizing any disagreement. You know, although we all know those are going to happen, but the whole thing with governance is trying to minimize the sort of the skirmishes or the disagreements by laying out the rule set and then having a process so that if the rules have to change, by golly, we could do that. Project culture boosts engagement and commitment to the project's success. And that's so important. I think we did talk a little bit about estimates, but collaborating with different departments for accurate estimates. You know, many times, depending on how an organization aligns its work, it could be that one person creates the entire product or 20 people could. So how do you account for all of that in your estimates? That's so important, and so important to make that decision as to how you're going to do it.
Angelo, I'll bring a couple of these to life with a specific story. And again, you know, you look at these things and hopefully it's a good checklist for people. There's a bunch of benefits for just spending the time to do the governance. John Stevens on the Panama Canal spent the time and reap the rewards. If you look at culture and you know, project culture and accountability, there's a story that comes to mind. Helped a client select a solution a few years ago, and we had an empowered selection team of people across the organization. There was 12 on the empowered team, and they each had a vote. So because they had a vote at the end of what solution they would select, they took their vote very seriously. That was a cultural thing at that company, that all the pressure was on them to do all their homework, gather the subject matter expert feedback, and come to the table eventually to cast their vote, if you will. I mean, literally hand up in the air type vote. Well, when the vote was cast, it was 11-1 for, you know, a specific solution. Well, the corporate culture could have said, hey, 11-1, that's an easy one. Move forward, boom, the 11 is going to win, and that's it. No more discussion. But in this particular culture, they said, we respect the fact there's one person on that team that had a descending vote, right? If you ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, that's that was the concept there, but didn't turn out exactly the same way as this one. But the one person who had the vote, we took a couple hours and we heard him out to why he descended on the vote and why he voted the way he did. And because we did that, we really galvanized the ultimate decision. I mean, the 11 eventually won. The one person said, yeah, I understand where we're coming from, and we are all unanimous. But it really helped us think through, have we really thought about every angle in making this decision? And we invested 2 hours of people's time, so that's something. But that was part of their corporate culture to really make that everybody feel like galvanized. And I just thought that was a great example to bring to life how corporate culture can be beneficial and make everyone feel like their vote matters, so to speak.
I think that's very important, Kameron. That is a fantastic point. The one that I think of is, what if a project leader or project manager does not believe that the corporate governance structure is adequate for establishing a successful project governance? And, that's one where you've got to have that answered in your governance structure, so that, things that are, if we had not had a proper governance to work with at those companies where we were doing Agile, they would have never been able to adopt Agile. Things had to change and change drastically. And, similar to the way Kameron talked about in that specific case, I mean, it is important to have an out so that there is a way for the organization to test the corporate governance or, change it. And I think that is so important. If you look at governance the way it is, in some ways, it could seem as though it's not very fostering to innovation. And that's what you need to guard against. You have to have means so that innovation can still happen. With as structured governance as you have, you still have to be able to handle the outliers, especially those that can help the business. I think we're ready for the next page.
Yeah, that's the content we had. I think it's so make sure we save some few minutes for additional questions, as Melissa wrote in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for an amazing session. A lot of great information here. We definitely have a couple questions that come in, but I want to give a second or two. Oh, look at that. I didn't turn my camera on. I was wondering why I couldn't see what was going on here. I want to leave a second or two for people to ask questions. Again, you can use the Q&A. You can use the chat. You can raise your hand and ask to be have your mic opened up that you can ask the question and use your verbal cues as well. Before we get to the questions though, I just want to remind you that if you're interested in learning more about how Avaap helps organizations with project governance, you can send Kameron an email, Angelo an email. You can send one to me at info@avaap.com and I'll make sure it gets to one of them. If you haven't already, take the time to explore avaap.com. We have great information about our services there, but also a lot of insight that you can leverage for your own business. I dropped the previous sessions led by Angelo and Kameron in the chat earlier. You can scroll up or request that I drop it again, and I'd be happy to do so. I guess we're ready for questions. Angelo, Kameron, if you're ready, I'm ready. So we'll start with one here. And I was surprised I didn't see it asked earlier, but it did come in towards the end of your conversation. How does change management fit into project governance? So two really important topics. Hopefully you can answer that for us. How does change management fit into project governance?
Even though I think Kameron is an absolute expert in change management, I'm going to take the first shot so that he can fill in the gaps for me as usual. But I think project management involves more the use of people, processes, methodologies to plan, initiate, execute, monitor, and close activities. It's designed to meet an organization's project goals and hopefully overall strategic objectives. On the other hand, I think change management it's similar to project management because it involves people, processes, and tools to effectively help organizations manage all of the changes that occur, whether as a result of project initiatives or other factors that might impact the business. So there's a fine line, and I know my daughter does consulting full time, and that's what she does, is help people be prepared for change that's coming down the road. And what she tells me is, you don't want to do it after the fact. You need to make sure that people are prepared ahead of time. That means assessing whether they need to be trained in something or just know, right? And, you know, I remember having been in this industry so long, I remember never thinking at all, for the most part, how much we were going to impact the business people when we did a change. Now, that was the ways of the 70s, you know, but today we've really done, I think, a much better job at making sure people who are going to be affected by change, whether it be a project governance, that they're prepared.
Yeah, well said. I agree with all that. You know, there's definitely an overlap with OCM and project governance. Just you know, think about the roles, the communication, those type of things, obvious. But think back to the pyramid, and the pyramid, you had stakeholders of the project, but that was kind of the project team touchers. There's a whole nother layer below that, that's the stakeholders that are impacted by the solution. So change management gets to the full list of stakeholders, including the people on the project team. So think about the executive steering committee. They're a key stakeholder in the project and key success. Change management will make sure that those people are engaged at the right level, the right level of understanding where they are in their you know, personal journey and their role, and really get to the heart of that stakeholder alignment and uncover if there's anything that's, you know, out of alignment, which is going to be kind of your seeds of problems in your governance. So that's just in a specific example I can think of where it's getting to the heart of those people and stakeholders that are, you know, play a big role in project governance.
Very good. You know, we got a follow on topic question here. So I want to stick on the topic of change management if we can for a second here. And this is a request, so I'll ask it and then I'll ask the question twice to give you a second to organize your thoughts. This has come in just now. What are some strategies that you can recommend to combat institutional resistance to necessary change? So, you know, I think we've had this year or 2 years even of just unrelenting change after change. So, you know, I'm sure people are, you know, getting to the point where there is a building up of resistance. So again, you know, looking for some strategies that you can recommend to combat institutional resistance to necessary change. Angelo, Kameron, I don't know which one of you wants to go first, but you can duke that out yourselves.
Yeah, we just fought and I won, so I want to do it. But I think when you say institutional change or institutional resistance, that means it's coming from above. So, you know, the leadership in the organization. Now, first of all, you have to remember the leadership, you have to believe wants what's good for the organization. Okay. So I think there may be sometimes a communication or definition difference as to what's good. And that's why you need to start going down. I remember doing this with an organization that was privately held, and I did an entire ROI for that organization to say, well, look, if we do it this way, we're going to benefit financially. And the owner of that company said, you know what, as the owner, I don't want it that bad. It doesn't matter to me that it's financially better. I have some, you know, other objectives that are more important. But it got the discussion going. Many times you look and you assume and you say, my gosh, why doesn't he see this? The ROI is clearly better if we go a different way. So I think you need to have that discussion. I always start with ROI, right? 9 out of 10 times, an organization is going to flow towards where they can make the most money and where they can benefit their customers and their employees most. So I start on those premises. But if you discover, hey, the money doesn't matter because, maybe it's in healthcare where, hey, we're going to spend a little more to maybe get this this cancer issue resolved, or something that, we're willing to spend a little more money to do that. So you have to really get to the core of what it is that the institutional resistance is all about. Just don't assume. It takes a lot of discussion.
Yeah, and it's a blanket statement to say institutional resistance to change. So you have to just break it down into, okay, what does that really mean? And the strategy I've seen in the past is, you have to chip away at breaking that down, and pick a high priority project that has a clear ROI. It's going to, it needs to happen. And OCM fundamentally is basically telling the organization, we respect you and we care about you, and therefore we know this is going to impact you, and so we are going to invest to manage that change. And by breaking it into a specific project and seeing that through, and then let's just say there's 100 stakeholders that are impacted by that project, by addressing those stakeholder groups and it down to the person level, now you're chipping away at, of course we're going to change as an organization. Every organization does, but we're going to handle it very methodically. And then now you have a success story to talk about for the next project you do that with, and then so on and so forth. Over time, you start to chip away at that blanket statement of organizational resistance to change by just demonstrating project XYZ, it happened this way. And then people who are treated with respect to manage that change, they're going to say, hey, it's not so bad. And that to me is one of the best strategies, is to just chip away at it with those successes like that.
So it sounds to me like having hard conversations, having real conversations, and maybe a dolphin and not a whale approach to how you do things, right? Small gulps instead of big chunks sounds like good advice that you're sharing with us here today.
Right.
I guess, while we're talking about governance, and we talked about the role of change management in governance, and that seems to be a hot button topic for the moment. So let's stick on the topic of change a little bit more. Question from John in the chat is, the ADKAR method, do you like it? And if yes, why? But I'm going to throw another one. If no, why not? So again, Angelo, Kameron, I don't know which one of you wants to answer it, but share your thoughts on the ADKAR method and whether you like it or don't like it. And if you think this is a question to pick up better with one of our change management experts, that's a fine thing to answer here as well.
I wish we could open the mic for that person, because I want to see how they used it, because that's important also. It isn't just the one type, it's how did they use it. That's what I would have as a question.
Well, I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, we like it. I mean, it's a proven methodology. It's not even a prescriptive methodology. It's more of a conceptual idea of how do you actually, assess the people, and like I just said, respect and get it to the heart of moving people through that emotional change. So anything that promotes that is a good thing. And that's why I certainly like it. There's probably others out there that have similar concepts, but it is trying to move people, with some rigor through their, let's face it, an emotional journey at the person level.
Well, John, who asked the question, and John, I don't mean to call you out here, has attended several of our events, so we're very happy to welcome you back. I did unmute your mic if you want to, share some additional thoughts behind your question. Happy to turn it over to you.
I guess my point is the one thing I really like about the ADKAR method is the reinforcement part at the end of the change. The beginning and the end, I think, are parts of the change that are often neglected. The reinforcement especially, because after everyone implements the change, everyone takes a deep breath instead of trying to reinforce how that all works. So anyway, I just was curious, as you are doing all these different projects, if you liked the method, if you thought that the ideas were worthwhile, or if there was a better one that you prefer. That was where I was going with that question.
I mean, this is a great opportunity to have a little bit of deeper discussions. You could probably, I think sharing some of the, you're getting into some more broader change management. What are the different work streams? What are the different approaches? And ADKAR is certainly one of them. But I think what you're describing in terms of thinking about the change all the way throughout the project and not just in intense moments is the right way to go. So any methodology, and certainly that's how we think too, change management happens as soon as you start thinking about a major change.
And one thing too, to mention is that we as an organization, had for a long time utilized ProSci, and that is one of their models, I believe, if I remember correctly. So that's something that our change management experts, our OCM, we refer to them, organizational change management folks, they utilize that as well. So it's something that we do. But I liked hearing your add-on, which says, the stressing the upfront piece and the back end piece, because you're right. I mean, many times organizations might just jump right into it without a clear upfront definition. And so too, at the end, what really got accomplished here, or are you moving on to the next project? So I liked hearing that. It really got to the core of not just, this method, but other methods as well.
Well, thank you both for the answers, and thank you, John, for asking the question. Today's topic came about because somebody said this would be a great topic for you to cover in the future. Avaap does have a dedicated change management practice. It's one of our differentiators as a consulting organization. So anyone on the line, if you have questions related to change management, organizational design, any of your change initiatives, those are great questions. Bring them to Angelo, Kameron, or myself. Happy to connect you with the right people inside Avaap. We are over time, so I am going to wrap it up right here. Again, we have a survey that's going to pop up as soon as we close. We always have a goal of getting 100% participation in our surveys. If it's something you can do, it'll take less than a minute. It would be greatly appreciated by me and the team. If you have a suggestion for a topic, something you're interested in hearing more about, we're always looking for what can we put together for our next session and provide, education to people who are looking for, help with their transformation to ensure success from the initiatives they're invested in. Angelo, Kameron, thank you both today for your insight, your expertise, your time. For everyone on the call, we appreciate you learning with us, sharing with us, and spending the last hour with us. Again, please take the survey when we close out here. And with that, have a great day, and hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.